So today's daf is Lamed Vav. We're going to start 5 lines from the top of Lamed Vav, where it says Umay Shofar Nami Chatzotzrot, because we've been talking about the difference between tiltul of moving a shofar versus chatzotzrot, and the machloket we had yesterday, the 3-way disagreement between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Nechemiah, whether you can touch or you can handle a shofar or a chatzotzrot on Shabbat. So we said that the term shofar is the same thing as chatzotzrot. Because Rav Chizda said, Amar Rav Chizda, Haneh tzilat milei ishtane shamayu miki charav bet hamikdash. There were 3 things that from the time that the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, their name changed. In other words, we reversed the name. What they used to call A, now they call B. So what are the examples? So one of them is, it says that Chatzotzarta Shofra. That they used to call a Chatzotzrot were trumpets in the times of the Tanakh, and a shofar was a ram's horn, like we know. But they started calling what we call a shofar, today we call it a shofar again, but what they started calling a ram's horn, Chatzotzrot, trumpets, like what we use for the term trumpet. Shofra, Chatzotzarta. They started, and similarly, they started calling in other words, they started calling trumpets shofar, and they started calling shofar trumpets. They switched the name. L'may nafkami. Now, why is it important to know this? La shofar shel Rosh Hashanah. So if somebody says wants to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, the colloquial term, in other words, what the common people called a ram's horn, was chatzotzrot. So you would have to ask for chatzotzrot. But when you read the Mishnah, or you read the Talmud, or you read the Torah, it says shofar. So you have to know that what people call today chatzotzrot is the shofar of the Tanakh. Yeah, afterwards, yeah. So arava, tzaftzafah, arava. So similarly, 2 plants, tzaftzafah and arava. Arava is the willow that's supposed to be in the lulav, and the tzaftzafah is another plant that is not kasher. It's not acceptable for the lulav.
Because I was in the Negev, in the army, they called it tzaftzafot, lo arava.
Tzaftzafot, right? So he says, right. So the Gemara is saying that they switched the term l'may nafkami. Now, what's the difference in lulav? That if somebody offers you, in other words, when the Mishnah is talking about arava, it's talking about what in the times of the Gemara was called tzaftzafah. And when the Mishnah says you can't use a tzaftzafah, it's talking about what was called later arava. So they switched the term in the times of the Talmud after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Similarly, petorah, petorata, petorta, petorah. So there were 2 different kinds of tables, a large table and a small table, and they ended up switching the terms petorah and petorta. In the beginning, petorah used to be a big table, and petorta used to be a small one, and then they reversed it. They started calling the big tables petorta, and the small tables petorah, like the very large bouncer at the bar that's named Tiny, or something like that. They started switching the terms, and that's what caught on. So, now what's the difference? That if you ordered a petorah, and you thought you were ordering a big table, and they bring you a small table, and you say, wait a second, I paid for it, I thought I was getting a big table. Sorry, now petorah means a small table. So you have to know how the terms are used in everyday language, so you know what you're getting into when you buy something. Amar Abaye says, Af anu nomar, hovlila bekase hovlila. There are 2 stomachs in those animals that chew their cud, and one of these stomachs has two membranes. The stomach, the first stomach, as Rashi explains this in some detail. So one of the stomachs is thick and has 2 membranes. One of the stomachs is thin and has only 1 membrane. Okay, so the problem is, one of them was called Hovlila, one of them was called Bekaseh. So what it says in the Mishnah, and it gives the Terefot, and it talks about the following halacha, that the stomach that has only 1 membrane, if it's punctured even a little bit, it makes the animal Terefa. It makes the animal not kosher. The stomach that has 2 membranes, if it's only punctured from one side, then it's okay, because it didn't go all the way through, because it has 2 membranes. So the problem was that they switched the term. So you have to be aware, because it says because what does the Mishnah talk about? It talks about the mitzad echad kishera u'mishnei tzedadim terefa, that with the bet kosot, right, the bekaseh, the bet kosot, it says that if it's punctured from only one side, it's okay. If it's punctured from 2 sides, then it's not okay. But that the bet kosot, what they called the bet kosot in early days, was the 2 membrane stomach. Now they call the 1 membrane stomach the bet kosot. So you're going to read this and say, oh, it's okay if it's punctured? And the answer is no, they switched the terms. Now what's called the Bet HaKosot is the one that's more stringent, that has only one membrane. And we switched around the language. Amar Rav Asher, Rav Asher says, Af anu nomar, Bavel, Borsif, Borsif, Bavel. They used to call Bavel, the place that is today called Borsif was once called Bavel. The place that's today called Bavel was once called Borsif. What's the difference? L'may nafkamina, legite nashim. For gite nashim, which means as follows. In the first Mishnah of Masekhet Gitin, one day maybe we'll get to there, it says that somebody who brings a get medinat hayam, somebody who brings a get from outside of Israel, so they have to say befanai nechtav or befanai nechtam. They have to say that I saw the signing and sealing of this get, and I know that it was done properly. Why? Because outside of Israel there was a concern that maybe people didn't know the halachot of gitin, they didn't know the halachot of divorce that well, and so unless if you sent the get with a shaliach, he had to testify that he had seen the writing and the signing of the get and that it was done properly. That was true if the get was brought medinat hayam, which is what the first Mishnah in Gitin says. Hamevi get medinat hayam. But if it was brought from Bavel or from Eretz Yisrael, we weren't concerned because we thought that the people in Bavel and Eretz Yisrael knew what they were doing. So the problem is that the Bavel of that time was now called Borsif. So now so in the times of the Gemara, when it's being written much later, after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash much later, so now somebody brings a get from Bavel, and you think it's going to be okay, because people in Bavel know what they're doing, right? No, because what we call Bavel today is really Borsif. And what they called Bavel in the old days was, it was a different place. So people are going to get confused and are going to think the wrong things in Gitin, and the get is no good. So therefore, we say that you have to be aware of these changes in language. Changes in language can be very significant, and we know. Like for example, today, in the times of the Gemara, I'll give you another example of that. In the times of the Talmud, challah was something that could only be eaten by Kohanim, and if you ate challah, you violated a prohibition of the Torah, because if you're not a Kohen and you're not tahor, you have to be tahor, you have to be pure to eat challah, and you're only allowed to eat challah if you're a kohen. Now everybody buys challah at the bakery. So what happened? So the language changed, right? Now challah means the bread that you eat. Now, so that's an example. So hadran alach b'mei madikin, hadran alach b'mei madikin, hadran alach b'mei madikin. We conclude second parak of Masekhet Shabbat. Now we get into the third and fourth parakim, which essentially deal with cooking, issues of cooking, and setting up fire for cooking before Shabbat. And we say kirash ziko b'gashu b'gvava notnim alei atavshil b'geved uvaitzim lo yiten ad shigrof ad shiten et ha'efer. So the first halacha that is stated in the Mishnah, and we're going to learn it the simplest way, and then the Gemara is going to play around with this and interpret it differently. But we're going to read it in the simplest way first. What does it mean? That if you had a stove, now the stoves in the time of the Talmud were stood up, and there was space for two pots on a stove. The stove had fire, and there was a stand, kind of like a stand, that the pot would sit over the fire. Okay, you would put it in, you would insert it part way, but basically it was suspended over the fire. And you could fit two pots into a kira. So the kira that was lit with kash ugvava, which is straw or stubble, is used. So you can put and leave a pot over that stove even into Shabbat. So it's Friday afternoon, and you've been cooking with a straw fire, and you can leave your pot over the straw fire even into Shabbat, and it can keep cooking into Shabbat. What's the reason? The reason is because straw and stubble burn up. They don't create any kind of charcoal. They don't create any kind of byproduct that continues to burn. Once the straw or stubble is burnt up, you've got nothing. You've got ashes and dust. It's nothing. So therefore, we're not concerned that a person is going to come to play around with coals, because there's nothing to play with. It's just straw burning. It's going to burn out. It's going to be gone. However, if you use gefet ve'etzim, then if you use gefet is basically the pulp from olives or from sesame, and it creates if you burn it, it creates a type of charcoal that continues to burn. Or etzim, obviously, if you have logs will burn for a long time, and they'll become embers, and they'll stay hot. So that ad shigrof, you have to clean out all of the logs, and then you can leave the pot over the stove. In other words, you can leave the pot over the stove, and the heat will stay in that little pocket under the pot, but you won't have any fuel under there anymore. Or you have to put or you have to cover the flame with ashes. In other words, that's like what people say a blech is today.
Did you learn where if there is a big log, then it's okay?
That's for lighting fire, for light or heat. That's not for cooking. That's not for cooking.
Oh, because cooking is
a process. You might,
because then you might
right. So even here, if certainly if the log wasn't lit yet, that would be another issue. Yeah. That was just talking about for firewood or for heat. Right. It has to be lit before Shabbat and has to take before Shabbat. Here we're saying that if you're going to leave food over it, that's a different concern. We're always concerned that your food is not going to be cooking the way that you want, and you might be tempted to play around with the coals. So if you're dealing with a fuel that doesn't create coals, it's no problem. But if you're dealing with a fuel that creates coals, so you either have to remove the coals and just leave the heat in there and hope that the remaining heat will keep it warm. Like you could turn off the oven, like you could put something in an oven nowadays, let's say, for example, and turn off the oven, and then if you leave something in there, it will stay hot for a while. So too, you could leave this pot over there with just the heat and no fuel, or you can cover over the logs or the gefet or whatever it is, and that will prevent you from coming to stoke any coals. So then it says like this: Bet Shammai omrim chamin avalo tavshilu, Beit Hillel omrim chamin v'tavshil. Beit Shammai further qualifies this, and again, I'm reading this according to the simplest reading of the Mishnah. We're going to see the Gemara has a totally different reading, but according to Beit Shammai, you can only leave hot water over a stove. That's it. You want to leave your other food cooking, you're not allowed to. Over a stove that is that even if you cover the coals or even if you sweep out the coals of a stove, you cannot leave food over it. You can only leave hot water. And Beit Hillel says no, even food. Beit Shammai omrim notlin avalo machzirin. Beit Shammai says you can take the food off the stove, but you can never put it back on the stove. And Beit Hillel says Beit Hillel omrim af machzirin, that if you covered the coals, which is like a blech, you could say like what they have a blech today, so then you could put the food, even return the food to the place that it was, even on Shabbat. And we're going to see the details of this as we go forward. Ibailu, they asked the following question: Hi lo yitin lo yachzirhu aval lashhot mashin afal pishin ogeruf veno katum umani chananyahi. So there are two possibilities of reading our Mishnah. If we look at our Mishnah, and it talks about a stove that was heated with one of two fuels, either a fuel that doesn't create coals or a fuel that does create coals. The question is, it says don't put food on there. Okay, so nim aleha tavshil, right? You can put food on it if the fuel was covered. So the question is, when is it talking about? Does it mean putting food? Does it mean returning food to the stove? Or does it mean putting it on in the first place? In other words, what you can leave. So the Gemara is saying, one possibility is that this whole Mishnah is only talking about returning it. Actually, you could leave food over even open coals. No problem. You don't have to cover the coals. You can leave the food. But if you want to return the food to the stove, then you need a covering. And that would be the position of Hananya. Because the Tanya will in the Braita, Hananya Omer, Kol Sheu Kemachal Ben Drusai Mutar Lashoto Al Gabe Kira Afal Pisheno Grufeno Katum. Because Hananya said that if you have food that was already mostly cooked, a third cooked or a half cooked, Kemachal Ben Drusai, depending on what your interpretation is, but it was cooked to the point of being edible, whatever that's considered. So then you can leave it over an open fire on Shabbat. You can leave it there, even over the coals that are not garuf and katum, which means they weren't covered and they weren't swept out. The coals are right there. You have it on the stove, suspended over the coals. No problem. No problem at all. You can't have it directly on the coals, but you can have it, we're talking about over the coals. The coals are under where the pot sits. So you don't need to do anything. The only time you need to cover the coals, according to Hananya, is if you want to put something back on the stove on Shabbat. That's when you need to have the coals covered. O Dilma, or maybe Lashot Tanan, our Mishnah means that even to leave something simmering over the stove, you need the coals to be covered. And what it means is Ve'i garuf katum in ilolo. And if you don't have v'kol sheken lachzir, certainly to return something to the stove, it must be that the coals are covered. So that's the machloket. Is what the Mishnah telling you? That even to leave something from before Shabbat, you need the coals to be covered. And certainly to return it, you need them to be covered. Or is it saying that no, to leave it over the stove, as long as it's mostly cooked or partially cooked, that's okay. But if you want to return it to the stove, you need to cover it. That's the question. So Tashma, let's try to resolve this. Because we have two parts of the Mishnah. In the beginning, we make the general statement, and then we say, Bet Shammai omrim, chamin avalo tavshil, Beit Hillel omrim, chamin v'tavshil, Beit Shammai omrim, that we said that first it said Beit Shammai says hot water but not a cooked dish, and Beit Hillel says even a cooked dish can be left over the stove. And then they say Beit Shammai says you can take it off the stove but you can't return it. So Beit Shammai is basically saying, you know what you can do? You can leave hot water over the stove and you can take it off, but that's it. That's the only thing he's going to allow you to do. And Beit Hillel says you can even put it back. You can leave hot water or food, and you can put them back.
Which term is cooked food and which
Tavshil.
Tavshil is cooked
Chamin is hot water. Chamin means hot water. There's another example of a word that the meaning changed.
Exactly.
Yeah, chamin means hot water.
I see.
Yeah. So iyamrat bishlama lashot tenan. So if we understand our Mishnah that it means that it's discussing the issue of leaving food over the fire, so then hachikatana, it makes perfect sense. Let's reread the Mishnah. Kirash yisikoa b'kashu b'gvava. The Gemara is rereading it. I mean, so the stove that was lit with straw and stubble, mashina le'at tavshil, you can leave food over it even without doing anything because it doesn't create coals. If the stove was lit with substances that create coals, then you can't leave it unless you clean away the coals or you cover them. And then the Mishnah goes on to clarify what you can leave on the flame. Right? In other words, the Gemara is interspersing its commentary to the Mishnah to show how it's reading it. That Beit Shammai is saying the only thing you can leave over is hot water, and Beit Hillel says you can leave hot water or you can leave food. And just like they argue about what you can leave over the stove, so that makes perfect sense. In other words, the way that the rabbis are reading the Mishnah now is the way that we read it in the beginning. That it's telling you there's a condition. If you want to leave food over the flame that is a live flame, like that creates coals, then you need to cover the coals. Even if you want to leave it on there. And then you have a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. What are you allowed to leave on there? And then you have a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. If you removed it, can you put it back? That's the way, the first way.
How would you cover the clothing with the pieces?
Then they would put dirt. They would put dust. They would put ashes over it to quiet down the coals. Not because that removes them totally, but because that will remind you not to play with them because they're covered with something. Like the way people have a blech on the stove, they put that piece of asbestos or whatever on the stove. What is it? You know what I'm talking about?
A piece of sheet of metal.
But yeah, the sheet of metal that they put over the flame. You know what I'm talking about?
The ashes is
It says efer, so they used ashes, I guess.
And then there is a stand.
They put a stand, yeah. Mm-hmm. So the coals are still there giving heat, but they're quieted a little bit, and you're not going to play with them because they're covered. That's the reason why they cover the there's actually one opinion that said, you really shouldn't cover, the people use the blech, they put it over the fire. It says, no, you should really cover the knobs because we don't stoke the fire by playing with the fire. We stoke it by playing with the knobs in the stove. Right. So that's why, some people say you should also cover the knobs really because nobody's going to touch the fire. Right. Why are you covering the fire?
Right.
Anyway, so that's one interpretation. But now the Gemara is going to say, wait a second. So now it's going to say, and what's the problem with Hananya? But if you're going to go with Hananya's view, that this whole Mishnah is talking about lachzir tenan, that really leaving food even without covering the coals is fine. It's only returning food that's the question. So then wait a second. So then how are we going to explain it? Hachi katane. Kirash is go bagash begvava machzirin alei tavshil bagef the beitim lo yachzir at shigrof at shitenet efer. Because then you're going to have to read the Mishnah like this: that if you lit the flame with straw or stubble, you can return food to it. And if you lit it with something that makes coals, then you have to cover it in order to return to it, right? In order to return something to it. But you don't need to do anything if you just want to leave it there. Umahin machzirin, and what can you return to it? Beit Shammai omrim chamin avalot tavshil, Beit Hillel omrim chamin v'tavshil. So then you're going to have to say that what is the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel? It's about returning, not about leaving. But then wait a second, Beit Shammai omrim notlin avalot machzirin, Beit Hillel omrim ach machzirin. Hatu lamali. In other words, what the problem is that if you're going to interpret the whole Mishnah as talking about returning food to the stove, then you're going to have a big problem. Because then Beit Shammai contradicts himself. Because Beit Shammai said, oh yeah, you can return water to the stove as long as you cover the coals. But then they say, no, you're not allowed to return anything. So wait a second, so according to Beit Shammai, there's nothing in the Mishnah then. There's nothing at all. So we move over to Lamed Zayin just for the resolution of this point. Liolam emalach lachzir tenan. Really, we can resolve this even according to Hananya's view. We just have to be a little more creative in the way we're going to read the Mishnah. How will we read the Mishnah now? That v'chasurin hasra v'achi katane. This is how we're going to read it. Kirash zikol v'gash v'gvava machzirin alei tavshil. That if you lit the stove with straw or stubble, you can return a pot to it on Shabbat. If you used a substance, a fuel that produces coal, then you cannot put anything back onto it unless you cover over the coals. But if you want to leave something on the stove, you can do that. Even though you didn't cover the coals and you didn't sweep them away. And what can you leave? Beit Shammai omrim chamir v'lo tavshil, Beit Hillel omrim chamir v'tavshil. That Beit Shammai says you can leave hot water but not a cooked dish, and Beit Hillel says you can do anything you want. V'achazara de'amrelach lav divrei akolhi ela machloket Beit Shammai uBeit Hillel. So Beit Shammai omrim nodin v'lo machzirin, uBeit Hillel omrim af machzirin. So basically what they're saying is like this, that if we're going to interpret the Mishnah, there are two ways to interpret the Mishnah. If we're going to interpret it according to Hananiah's liberal view, so then what are we going to say? That really what the Mishnah is talking about is that you're allowed to leave whatever you want over an open flame on Shabbat, no problem. The only question is, if you removed something from the open flame, can you put it back? Okay, and there the Mishnah is saying you have to cover the coals. And then the Gemara says, and what I said about leaving, what the Mishnah means is what I said about leaving things over an open flame, that's only according to Beit Shammai, chamin, hot water. And according to Beit Hillel, it's anything you want. And that thing that I said about returning something to the flame, that's only according to Beit Hillel, because Beit Shammai rejects the whole thing. So what ends up happening is that no matter how we interpret this Mishnah, so what we're going to end up with is that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are arguing about what you can leave over the flame on Shabbat. Okay, according to Hananiah's view, they're arguing about what you can leave over an uncovered flame on Shabbat. According to the rabbis, the rest of the rabbis, what they're arguing about is what you can leave even over a covered flame on Shabbat. Everybody agrees, though, that Beit Shammai is going to say you can never return anything even to a covered flame. So the difference is going to be whether our Mishnah is allowing you to leave edible but not fully cooked food over an open flame, according to Beit Hillel, or whether it's saying that even for that you need a covered flame. Even if you're going to leave the food from before Shabbat, you're not going to put it back on. You're just going to leave it from before Shabbat and you're going to take it off and eat it. You're not going to put it back on. Even there, according to the Chachamim, you need to cover the flame. And Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are arguing either about what you can leave over a totally uncovered flame, or what you can, that's what Hananiah would say. They're arguing about that. Or, according to the rabbis, they're arguing about what you can leave over a covered flame, because there's nothing you can leave over an uncovered flame, according to the rabbis, unless that uncovered flame was made by straw, because we're not concerned that you're going to come to stoke the coals. Basically, this is and these two views actually are brought. There's this machloket. We're going to see they go on with this machloket a little bit further. This machloket is actually a machloket all the way down to the Shulchan Aruch, where the Shulchan Aruch holds like the rabbis, the Chachamim, that you cannot leave a partially cooked food over an open flame before Shabbat. Let's say you wanted to leave an open flame. Nobody would really do that nowadays because people don't want to leave an open flame anyway. But if you wanted to do that, you wouldn't be allowed to leave partially cooked food over an open flame, according to Sfaradim. According to Ashkenazim, they hold like Hananiah, and they say that you could leave food over an open flame, but you can't. You can't return it obviously to an open flame. You'd have to cover it if you wanted to return it. So that's actually a difference even in halacha.
So when